great joy and pleasure to welcome you to our first critical conversation in peace education, hosted by the University for Peace, the Global Campaign for Peace Education, and the International Institute on Peace Education. We know there are many places you could be right now, and we deeply appreciate you choosing to spend your time here with us in a conversation that we hope will enrich us all. My name is Stephanie Knox Steiner, and I am resident faculty member in the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies and academic coordinator of the Peace Education Master's Program at the University for Peace in Costa Rica. And I'm swooning a little bit because some of my elders from the Peace Education Program are on this call. Beloved Suihin To, Virginia Kawagas, Abelardo Brenes. I bow in honor to each of you, and it's because of you that I'm here, and just so happy that you are here. I'm hosting this call with my dear friend and colleague, Tony Jenkins, who I will pass the mic to shortly. Before we get started further, I just want to give a little tech orientation. So we're recording the call, and if you don't want to be seen in video, don't want to have your name shown, you're welcome to mute the video, change your name to something anonymous. We also have closed captions enabled. So if you would like closed captions, Zoom changes where it shows up. It'll either be at the bottom of your bar, the Zoom bar, you'll see a little CC symbol, and you can click on that and enable closed captions. If you don't see it there, it'll be under the More button. Tony and I are hosting. We'll try to keep up with the chat and any tech issues that you have during the call. Hopefully we won't have any. And so as you have been doing, as you're entering, we welcome you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Sorry, my screen, am I sharing right now? Okay, good. My screen just went a little weird. Oh. So as you're landing, we invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know on Earth where you're calling from. As I mentioned, I'm calling from Costa Rica. It's traditional Huetar territory here in Ciudad Colón. And I'm calling you from the side of the Rio Virilla. And I can see Volcan Poas in the background, and it's been erupting this week. So that's feeling very present for us here in the Central Valley. So as we're landing, I'd love to invite us to take a couple of deep breaths together. I realize some of you might be joining this call while you're cooking dinner or getting kids ready for school or driving or on the subway. So if you can't stop what you're doing, don't worry about it. It's just an invitation. But in the meantime, if you're able, I invite you to just let yourself land here. Become present to this moment. Notice where you're sitting. If you want, you're welcome to close your eyes. Feel that earth beneath you, supporting you, all around you. Letting yourself land. Feeling yourself supported by the land. And bringing your awareness to how we are all connected by the great earth. We're calling from so many places today. But sensing and feeling into, in an embodied way, that we're sharing this planetary home, that we are connected through it. Breathing together. And also connected in this Zoom space through technology. And if you'd like, I invite you to take a nice deep breath in, maybe take a stretch, anything that would feel good for your body as we settle in together. And feel free to return your eyes to the screen if they were closed or away. And you might want to take a moment just to take a look through the Zoom space. You might go into gallery mode and look at who's here. We have 87 peace educators from around the world on the call right now. What a happy moment. So as we are beginning, and now that we've arrived, I just wanted to briefly orient us to the inspiration behind this series. And James, I see your hand up. We're not going to open it up to dialogue right now. We will be doing that later in the call. But for right now, if you have a question or issue, you're welcome to put it in the chat or reach out to Tony or I directly. I just wanted to give you a sense of the program as a whole and then our flow today. So in terms of the inspiration behind this series, I had been wanting to bring some of the conversations that we have on campus into a more public space. And then I'm on the transnational advisory group of the Global Campaign. And in one of our meetings, we had a discussion about offering a webinar conversation series, and this was born, and today's the first day. So we're thrilled to be launching this series today. And the overall goals of the series, which we intend to be monthly and ongoing, include uplifting grassroots efforts in peace education, connecting those efforts to global agendas, asking important questions of ourselves and of our field and its present and future directions, which is really the heart of today's call, which Tony is going to be sharing about more in a moment, and fostering and weaving connections among the global peace education community. We know there is power in gathering together, and we hope this series will provide a sense of solidarity, inspiration, and connection, and will help each of us more deeply engage in our peace education praxis. Magic happens when peace educators gather, and we're open to the emergence of what might unfold in these gatherings. So as for today's flow, in a moment, I'll be passing it over to Tony, who will introduce the topic of today and give a welcome from the GPCE and the IIPE. And then myself and several other transnational advisory group members of the Global Campaign will be sharing the questions that we're holding for ourselves as peace educators and for the field of peace education. And then we'll invite you to share the questions you're holding in small breakout groups. So we hope this will be a really rich opportunity for connection and for sharing. And then after about 30 minutes in small groups, we'll come back together and do a debrief and a closing. So with that, I wanted to share, before I pass it to Tony, at the last International Institute on Peace Education in Nepal, we created some community agreements. I'm just going to put those in the chat. Even though as peace educators, we share many of the same values, I think it's always important to ground ourselves in some agreements for our engagement. And so these are the ones that we came up with in Nepal. The space is a shared responsibility. Everyone contributes, listen actively and intently, express responsibly, receive feedback graciously. If tension or conflict arises, let's lovingly call and create a dialogue. Hold the space with respect for everyone in it. Create a community of care and belonging. The space is big enough for us to come together and enjoy. This is also a space for exchange and learning from each other's work. And I think that's all I'll read for right now. And I think all I had to share before I pass it over to you, Tony. Let me just check. Yeah. to say how we gather matters, and in that spirit, we offer those guidelines for how we engage with each other. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Tony, and welcome everyone to the call.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for setting the goal and intention of the series and establishing the guidelines for this as a virtual learning community, which is, as this is the first in our series, we're hoping that those guidelines we can carry with us as we move into future monthly sessions. So it's my pleasure to welcome everyone here on behalf of the Global Campaign for Peace Education and the International Institute on Peace Education. And I really want to take just a moment to express my gratitude to Stephanie and colleagues of the University for Peace for initiating this series. The Global Campaign for Peace Education intentionally tries to work with and through its various partners. And so this partnership is one that has been in the making for many, many years. In fact, I see this as a bit of a full circle moment in a way. So 22 years ago, 2003, we collaborated with the University for Peace, bringing some colleagues to Teachers College at Columbia University under the guidance of Abelardo Brenna, so I saw was with us today. We brought together a dozen or so leading peace education academics and theorists and practitioners from around the world to discuss kind of the bigger purpose and goals and objectives of peace education as a field, but more specifically, what a master's degree in peace education should entail. And that conversation led to the establishment of the first master's degree program in our field at the University for Peace back in 2004. So first of all, I want to congratulate the University for Peace for 20 plus years now of the program, which is really remarkable. I want to celebrate that. But I think what today is an opportunity to continue those critical conversations that we held 20 plus years ago, bringing in obviously new concerns here now that we're 2 decades into this new century. Obviously, the gravity of the current global political and the economic order weighs upon us. And there's this obviously increasingly urgent existential crisis that's being posed by climate change, amongst other things, that is at the forefront of a lot of our practice at this moment. So while, again, the urgency of the moment guides us in our thoughts today, let's celebrate our achievements, especially those of UPEACE, and without the foresight of those who were involved in organizing and establishing that program, I don't think we'd be where we are today. So thank you. And I see, by the way, looking around the room, another probably at least half dozen or so people who were at that special session back in 2003. So it's wonderful to see you here again. So let's talk about today's session. So the purpose of our conversation today, I see, is kind of renewing those conversations from 20 plus years ago. And our session really today is dedicated to eliciting and contextualizing, new concerns for peace education. So we're going to be inviting you in a moment to pose your critical questions that we as peace educators should be asking ourselves and should be asking the field at this moment. So more specifically, we're going to invite you to a space where you can pose the questions that you are holding and why these questions need to be asked now. So we conduct today's session very much in the spirit of a Freirean problem-posing form of education. We are trying to elicit and facilitate an elicitive process, right? We're all going to be invited to pose those questions, and then these questions, which I think we could consider Freirean generative themes, will in turn seed future sessions where we'll have the opportunity to engage in deeper dialogue and learning and reflection together with the intention of co-discovering solutions, learning together, and exploring the possibilities for action. And that action is so important to our praxis, right? Whether that comes in the form of personal or collective efforts, pursuing pedagogical practice or research or advancing theory or engaging in advocacy together. We want to move in those directions. So, again, as Stephanie has expressed, what we're trying to do with this series is create a sustained virtual space, a sustained virtual learning community dedicated to addressing the present and future needs of the field. All right, so in just a few minutes, we will have this chance to break out into these small discussion rooms where you'll each have those chances to pose your questions and engage in a bit of a dialogue together. But before we do, again, as Stephanie's mentioned, I've invited a few members of the Global Campaign's transnational steering group to kind of model and pose their questions for us and their motivations. And I'm going to ask that each of these speakers really keep their thoughts relatively short, in 2 to 4 minutes each. And I'm going to start off by inviting Stephanie to model our question posing for today.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to put my questions in the chat. I had a very hard time deciding what to ask because I have so many questions. I think I have more questions than answers. I think the reason for the questions might be self-evident, so I'll just share them. So the first one, how do we navigate the tensions of teaching for peace within systems that were not designed for such, i.e. that are not life-affirming or rooted in care, and at this particular moment might be actively hostile to it? And how do we do this pedagogically, personally, practically? The second question, how do we reorient peace education towards learning from, with, in, as, and in service to the community of life? How do we decenter the human, recenter the land, remember ourselves as a part of the Earth's living metabolism? And then the third question, what is the role of artificial intelligence in peace education? What are its dangers and possibilities? And the broader question, I think, is what is the role of education in the age of AI? But as such, what is the role of peace education in the age of AI? So I will leave those there for now, and I think I'm passing it to Sun Wan.
Yeah, so
maybe you're introducing first.
Thank you. I want to invite Soon-Won Kang, who's a member of our transnational steering group. She's a professor emeritus of Hanshin University in South Korea and a longtime collaborator with UNESCO's Asia Pacific Center for Education for International Understanding. And I'm giving really short introductions today. I've put a link in the chat where you can read all of our wonderful speakers' bios in greater detail. So Soon-Won.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. So this is Sunan speaking from South Korea. I appreciate Tony and Stephanie for providing us with today's platform. Peace contradictions in South Korea can be basically seen as the overall non-peaceful and violent culture that originated from the historical legacy of colonial rule, national division, and the Korean War, and the suppression of democracy with violation of human rights due to military dictatorship under the Cold War system. So several weeks ago, we held a peace education dialogue. About 20 peace education advocates gathered and discussed the current direction of peace education in a very critical time after the impeachment of President against the martial law, as you know about the Korean political affairs. Here we raised the following as key issues. I think this is a general peace education issue that is being faced not only in Korea, but also in most countries. The first, the peace education based on universal peace discourse is needed rather than Korea's historical and social specialties. It seems that the Korean peace studies are not expanding its scope because there are too many problems and wounds due to the historical trauma. The Korean specialties are overemphasized and do not meet the international dimension. So how to localize the universal dimensions into the Korean context is seriously put on the table. This problem, the balance between the universality and particularity, is probably a common problem that most people experience. The second, an approach that seeks to re-examine the North Korea, one typical country as a communist one, and from a third world perspective, should be reconsidered deeply. We need to move beyond viewing the relationship between South and North Korea as a Cold War confrontations that has persisted for a long time, and viewed it differently in the context of uneven world history. North Korea is not a country that should be viewed only within the structure of division, but also global South manipulated by U.S. imperialism. Nevertheless, Article 11, accusation session of the Unification Education Support Act, if a person providing unification education conduct unification education that violates the basic order of liberal democracy, the Minister of Unification shall demand correction or report the person to an investigating agency. So in this current situation, where anti-communism is the national policy, we must reconstruct the environment in which unification education that seeks to unify North Korea is re-examined as critical peace education from the viewpoint of global justice. The third, you may know on the 3rd December, the last year, the declaration of martial law threw the Korean society into a state of anxiety and fear. But with the national resistance and the shift response of the National Assembly, the president who declared martial law was impeached. But society was divided into extreme right and progressive. The peace education and dialogue were called for in response to these extremist confrontations. So we have the three another questions. We need to discuss how to re-examine the violence and undemocratic nature of new media after the impeachment from a peaceful perspective. Second, in the midst of the spread of extremism that divides people into black and white, there needs to be more gray, the third point, mediating elements in the middle. Without the gray, or like a sponge, a dialogue cannot take place. So how to make this gray point? And the third, the generational problems, intergenerational conflict and conflict surrounding the impeachment have resulted in social division. So intergenerational peace education is urgently needed to resolve it. The stubbornness of the old generation and their anti-communist views on North Korea make peace education toward diversity, coexistence, and justice very difficult. It is difficult because a far-right YouTuber further strengthened their stubbornness, but intergenerational dialogue is an important means to achieve cultural peace. In the end, we need to make them talk together. Even this is very difficult. We need to create a place for citizens to talk together, including the students, and build trust in people and make efforts to create a small and safe place so that people do not feel that the world is cruel. So we have a very fluent dialogue on the several weeks ago. So we need help from the friend outside the Korea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sun-Wan. And now I'd like to invite Anita Judkins-Oliveras, who is a professor at the Educational Foundations Department in the Faculty of Education at the University of Puerto Rico, and a coordinator of the UNESCO Chair on Education for Peace. Anita.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy here looking at who's in the chat and who's been joining the meeting. So hello to those that I've met before and hello to the new people that we're meeting today. I thought about two questions that are more of a general nature. And one has to do, I think, with a more how we focus on a global problem. And one has to do in how we focus on the importance of context and local issues in peace education. So my two questions, and I will write them in the chat soon after I say them. The first one is how to make peace education relevant at the present time, and particularly in the face of increasing rise of authoritarianism, fear, and silence as tools to force obedience and compliance. And this is a problem, obviously, every day in the United States, and therefore affects Puerto Rico at the same time, but it's a global problem that we are experiencing particularly that way right now. But how to make peace education relevant given the rise of authoritarian ideas and the use of fear and silence. And the local question has to do with how, as peace educators, we can contextualize education to local problems, peace education to local problems, ways of knowing, and forms of action. So those are my questions for today.
Thank you very much, Anita. And now I'd like to invite Lydia Ruprecht, the International Coordinator of UNESCO Associated Schools Network and head of the network's unit at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris. And prior to this current appointment, you may have known of Lydia for the work that she did in leading the development of the 2023 recommendation on education for peace, human rights, and sustainable development. So Lydia.
Thank you, Tony and Stephanie and Anita and Sunwoon and everybody here on the call. I see some familiar faces. Lovely. Very bluntly, in our current context, there's clear manifestations of tensions in the real world, of course, but I also mean in our diplomatic world. That's where I'm speaking, where I'm sitting from, here at UNESCO, part of the UN family. Where we're seeing wavering multilateralism and most importantly, a reconfiguration of the international rule-based system and also the ground rules for engagement into diplomatic international affairs. So the question for me, working on education for peace now through the ASP network schools, is that how can UNESCO play an effective role as an intergovernmental organization? We are an intergovernmental organization in supporting peace education in this specific context, where the rules of engagements are changed and the rationales for engaging is very nationalistic. So there's what is the place for an intergovernmental organization to be effectively promoting peace education? Considering that, the good news is that we are witnessing an uncontested support for peace education. And this was witnessed at the recent session of their executive board. Peace is an unbattled term. Member states all rally behind the 2023 recommendation. It's quite remarkable and extremely comforting to feel that majority of countries do feel that it speaks to them. So the debate is not so much on the recommendation, on the principles, though, of course, some would prefer some and less others of the aspects of the recommendation, but there's an overall sense that it's going in the right direction and they can adhere to that vision. And they also adhere to the vision of UNESCO being mandated to work on peace education. But it's not so clear as what are the most strategic, in this context of shrinking budgets and this reconfiguration, what are the most strategic entry points to advance peace education? Right? If you have limited resources, political resources, financial resources, and time, where do you start? So it's in this time space. Where do you start? Where do you begin? Where do you emphasize and put your political, financial resources? That's something that I think we are struggling with where I'm sitting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. So we have a lot of good questions here, some beginning seeds for our conversation. Lydia brings us to these questions of the pragmatic strategic entry points. But all of our guests today have obviously brought forth concerns coming from the contextual conditions in which they find themselves working and living. And so we have a lot in our agenda. I was thinking about some questions I would pose. There's a few members of our group who couldn't be here today. Specifically, I'm thinking of Werner Wintersteiner, who posed a few queries that he was framing as kind of fundamental or eternal questions, ones that we bring ourselves back to often, such as, how does peace education, like any education for that matter, avoid indoctrination? What's the relationship between the personal and the political? Right, so should peace education be oriented towards nurturing personal peacefulness, or should it direct its attention to preparing learners for political action and participation to challenge things like the war system? Perhaps we need to reconsider the importance of holism and comprehensive approaches, such as those advocated by Betty Reardon and others. But my question today, and I'll be short about this, really centers around present concerns. Specifically, similar to Anita, deeply concerned about the rapid rise of authoritarianism, not just in the United States, but around the world. And this authoritarianism in the context of education has been preceded by a half century or more of a sort of neoliberal takeover of educational spaces. So the questions that I'm grappling with are actually questions that my students were posing yesterday. Out of deep concern, yesterday my students organized a student-led teach-in on the threats being posed to education and what they can do to resist those threats. So the questions I'm thinking about today is, what role should peace education be playing in countering these dehumanizing trends of neoliberalism and authoritarianism? I'm also thinking specific about my day-to-day working context in higher education. How can peace education be more fully integrated into spaces of higher education in an effort to counter and resist these forms of political, structural, cultural, and epistemic violence? And how must our learning goals adapt to these emerging contextual conditions? All right, right now, I feel that courage and human agency needs to be centered more now than ever to be able to resist these oppressions that have been relatively unchallenged and to put forward a vision for the future that we desire. So let me stop there for now. I'll get in a moment, I'll have a chance to kind of pose the questions that I shared into the chat for you all to see. But we want to take a minute here to kind of transition into a breakout spaces where you can all have a chance to share the questions that matter to you. So Stephanie, you can help assist me with this in a second. We're going to break out into about 10 or 11 breakout rooms. So between 8 and 10 people in each group, we'll kind of randomly establish those. And the question, again, that we're asking you to explore, I'll put here into the chat for everyone to see, is, what are the questions that you are holding for peace education now, and from your own context or conditions that you're working and living in, and why are these questions that you need to be asking and that we need to be asking and exploring together? So in terms of process, because we're going to kind of randomize these groups, we're going to ask for your help in making this work. And so I just as an order of business here, we're going to suggest that as you get into these groups to first designate a reporter or a recorder and someone who can help present out some of the key questions that your group is generating when we return back to the main group. So please take a moment to appoint that person, to find a volunteer. As best you can, try to nurture a space where everyone can share first, giving everyone a minute or two to kind of present their questions. We're going to have about a half an hour for this breakout moment. If time permits, after everyone has shared and posed their questions, please do, open a space for dialogue to explore the questions posed, to develop new questions, and so forth and so on. And when we return back to the main group, depending on time, we'll have a chance to at least hear a couple of the key questions from each group. Stephanie will help facilitate that, and we'll try to capture those into a collective document that we can share with everyone going forward. So Stephanie, can you help us launch these breakout rooms?
Yes, so I'm creating them right now. You should receive an invitation to join. And as Tony said, if everyone could be prepared in written form and verbally to share the questions that you generate together, we will do that when we return. We'll look forward to hearing what you come up with. Welcome back, everyone. It's always painful as a host to have to pull people out of breakout rooms. And you know they were good discussions when no one comes back early, when everyone stays until they're forced to return to the main room. So we know and trust that you've been having really rich discussions, and we would love to hear from the groups, as many as we can. The call will end at the top of the hour. We had 10 groups, so it would help a lot. Tony just put the shared document into the chat. So if whoever was a recorder from a group could go into that document and start copy pasting the questions that you generated together, that would be wonderful. And then if folks who are willing to report back from their groups could raise your hands, that would be really helpful to me, and I'll facilitate the process of debriefing and hearing what you all were up to. Tony and I wish we could have been in every group, and we were in no groups while we were in the main room together. But we would really, really love to hear. And we do need to keep it to a minute or two per group. So if folks could, Naomi, I see your name first. Also, if folks, you might need to remute yourselves coming back to the main room. So just make sure you're still on mute. Naomi, please go for it.
This is really difficult to encapsulate a conversation in just a minute. So I will just hit a couple of highlights. I don't really have very good notes, but we have some of our comments that I think maybe just we could see in the chat. We had persons in our group from Haiti, from Myanmar, from Brazil, from the United States, very different contexts, but all finding ourselves, I think it's fair to say, in places where conflict is happening. And so one of the things we talked about is the importance of educating, trying to figure out how to prioritize both institutionally and in communities the value of peace education, at least from a higher education perspective, in the United States, where in my context anyway, the humanities and social sciences are really being devalued. How to perhaps in other ways weave peace education into other curricular areas to maintain its presence in higher education, particularly for undergraduates. Also, what other questions about what other alternatives do we have, whether it's research or presenting papers or sharing documents with various groups to encourage nurturing of empathy and intercultural relationship in ways that help us to see one another as human. So that is just a very, very short. There was so much more richness to our conversation, thinking about polarization and dismantling systemic inequalities and how peace education, questions about how peace education can play a role in that. I think I've touched on some, but looking forward to hear from other groups too.
Beautiful. Thank you, Naomi, for sharing that summary of the group's rich discussion. I'm sure one thing that we can pay attention to as well in this debrief are what are the connecting themes we notice between the conversations we had in the different breakout rooms. Anina, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We also had a very rich discussion in our group, and where we also saw that despite being from different contexts, many things also connect. I'm going to share oh no, this was not the correct one. Give me a second so that I can share my notes in the chat also. That might be helpful. No, I don't know why it's not working. Okay, I'll do it later. And I will just share in written, so in speaking. So one thing that we talked about is how we can connect peace education with other areas or other types of education, such as global citizenship education, or one formulation was, how can we do peace education by any other name? But then related to that was also the question of like how we then can bring questions of structural violence and injustices into these areas such as global citizenship education, because these areas of education don't necessarily have the same premises and could also be used, for instance, 21st century competences to build better weapons. And a bit related with that, also this question of like, how can we avoid doing a peace education that is a band-aid while supporting unsustainability of current systems. Another area that we talked a lot about of like how that could be connected with peace education is religion, spirituality, and religious education. So how can we connect peace education with these areas while avoiding to ignore also the violent potentials of religion? And a bit connected to that also, how we can do peace education in the context of authoritarianism that are also sometimes religiously motivated or religiously justified or supported by religious movements. Then one question that we also had was, how can we connect peace education with disarmament and talking about war, and especially in the current climate and current wars. And then something a little bit different was about bringing it from beautiful recommendations to concrete practice. So how can we like manage to really bring it to the classroom, to concrete local practice? And then we also talked about nonviolence and the concept of nonviolence and how we could center that in peace education. So we talked about many, many things. I hope I captured it all. And would love to continue. The conversation was very sad to leave the breakout group, but happy to be back here also.
Thank you so much, Anina. Each one of those questions, I was just like, yes, 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 such rich questions. I'm noting the Band-Aid question, and I seem to have lost it in the chat, but Mohammed was asking a question in the chat. Does the current model of peace education challenge systems of power and inequality, or does it help maintain them by promoting passive harmony over active justice? These are such important questions for us to be holding together. So thank you. Is there another group who would like to voice? Yes, Vanessa, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Well, we had dynamic conversations. It's hard to really summarize. And I think I wrote a novel on the side in the chat. So my apologies. It was just really hard to summarize what everyone was discussing. So I rather think we'll pick up on themes. And I think the biggest themes for me that came out of our discussion was the real importance of understanding our inner peace and being in touch with that, and how that plays a role in how we show up in the classroom or whatever peace education environment we're involved in, and how that feeds into the vision of peace. So I think a lot of us, maybe with all the distractions going on, have lost sight of what is this vision of peace we're actually striving towards. I think it's important to have a vision, to know kind of what are we working for and towards. And I think I think that was a really strong theme that came through. And also that kind of ties into one of the questions that also I posed to the group was, how do we activate the sense of peace agency in our students? Because I feel a lot of the conversations I'm having with my students is this sense of helplessness. Like, what can we do? There's so, this, as one of the participants said, meta crisis. And so we have crisis going on in many directions. And so how do we engage our students more so that we help them develop this sense of agency again? And how do we have peace action? how can peace education play a role in developing peace action? And this is something myself as a peace educator that I'm myself trying to do with my students. So I think these were some of the crucial themes, and also just the attack on the international organizations, human rights framework, just really how do we kind of scrutinize these organizations we've taken for granted for so long and really remind ourselves, how are they relevant? And how do we keep them relevant? So we had so many great discussion points, but those were kind of the few key themes that at least I hopefully noted with our group. It was wonderful, our discussion. It was sad that we had to end it, but it was great. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm so happy to hear how sad it was for the conversations to end, just knowing how rich the conversations you had were, which was really our hope with these calls, that we would be able to foster a space for dialogue and connection. So yeah, we'll continue to do that through this series. Is there another group who would like to share back to the main group? Sa, Tan, please go ahead, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. So in our group, the participants are from Turkey, United States, Myanmar, and Brazil. And I don't remember other ones, sorry. Yes, we have only two questions. The first one is from the context of Brazil and Myanmar, because we do not have a formal peace education program as a national curriculum. So we have a question that how can peace education be introduced in national curriculum to reach a wider audience? So if we cannot touch the government policy, how will be the alternative way to reach the wider audience? Another question is regarding some policy changes, plan to change some policy, especially in the United States. In the case of Indiana, so there are some policy changes, maybe like a prohibition of diversity, inclusiveness, and such kind of things. So but these factors are essential parts to be understood in education piece. So how can educator will teach or continue to teaching peace without worrying this facts? So what will be alternative way? So that is the two questions in our group generate. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, rich questions. Thank you so much, Sa, Tan, for reporting those back to us. And yeah, critical questions I'm sure many of us are holding right now around how do we do this when it's not supported at the national level? How do we find ways to promote it and integrate it when when the environment is actively hostile towards it even? I think we have time for maybe one. Anita, let's go over to you for, this might be our last vocal share from a group, but we would love for everyone to continue adding to that document. And when we send a follow-up, we'll send the document out as well. Go ahead, Anita. You're muted, Anita.
Sorry. I wrote the questions from the group in the document. I think there were different questions. Some of them had to do with the reach and impact of peace education with youth, with officially making it institutionalized in government systems. So some questions had to do with reach, impact, how to get youth interested in peace education. Others had to do with emotions and trauma and the need to tend to psychological issues in conflict-afflicted societies, and increasingly more with all these threats we are facing as peace educators. How can we teach peace education and be safe? And how can we integrate the needs of special psychological and emotional needs of those that are participating in peace education efforts. And we ended on a positive note with Maysoon from Palestine. We had people in the group, we had people from Colombia, Palestine, India, the United States, and Puerto Rico. And Maysoon from Palestine shared a life story about growing up in a school in which she went to school together with people from Christian backgrounds, Muslim backgrounds, and other religious backgrounds, and grew together in that school, and how they can still, across those differences, still be able to be friends and support one another after that experience. So that sums it up. It was kind of in different directions. And we introduced ourselves. I think that's really important. So that took up some time of our discussion.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anita, for sharing those really, really rich and important topics. And glad to hear you introduced ourselves. Yes, we're hoping that through this we get to know one another, especially as we do it in an ongoing basis. Well, thank you for all of those rich discussion questions. The goal of this session wasn't to answer the questions, right? It was to generate them. And our invitation now is to hold those together. You can hear so much resonance among the different themes across the groups, while there were also some divergent and distinct questions as well. But the task ahead now will be continuing these conversations, and these questions that we're asking today, we'll be taking like one of those questions and then using that as the theme for another conversation, and on and on. So you've given us so much to work with today, and invite us to also just continue holding these questions together in our own work and life as peace educators. And with that, I think I'll pass it back to Tony to close us out and wrap us up.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, for reminding us of the future intentions. Again, today was about a seeding of the conversation for us. We have 6 full pages of excellent questions to review, organize, thematize, and to think a little bit about where we go next in the conversation. So many urgent questions. How do we choose? We'll figure that out. Maybe we'll invite some of you to support us and help us with that process. But we are excited to say that we are making intention of trying to make this a more or less a monthly gathering. And we've tentatively planned our next date to be Wednesday, June 4th at this same time frame. 10:30 Eastern time in the US, 8:30 a.m. Costa Rican time. And you can find of course, your corresponding time around the world, again, for another 90-minute conversation. So give us a little bit of time. We'll try to kind of review and clean up the questions that you've generated and shared with us. And hopefully in the next week or so, we'll have some better clarity about where we go next for the next conversation. But for closing us out today, we have a proposal to do something I've never done before, but Stephanie had this great idea, and it's this concept of doing a chatterfall. And so what we're going to invite everyone to do is to type one word or a very short phrase into the chat. Don't that is sort of something that's living with you right now in this moment that you're leaving this conversation with. And what we're going to do is don't hit the enter button yet. Type it in there, and the goal will be in about 1 minute's time that we will simultaneously enter that chat together. So collect your thoughts. Take a moment of quick reflection here to put that one word or phrase that is living with you, that you're leaving this conversation with today, into the chat, and I'll give us a prompt here momentarily. All right, so on the count of 10, we're going to launch this chatterfall together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, look at it go.
We.
Wow. Peace, solidarity, agency, unity and diversity, justice, hope, not alone. Beautiful. All right. Thank you all very much. We'll be in touch soon and help us grow and expand this community, this learning community together. Have a wonderful month. We'll see you in June.